In a mansion that shimmered with marble floors and quiet cruelty, no maid had lasted more than a single day. The billionaire's 4 children, each as untamed as privilege could breed, were nightmares wrapped in innocence. Screams, spilled food, torn clothes, shattered glass. Every helper fled before sunrise. But one morning, a woman named Mara stepped out of a taxi, her shoes dusty from the city, her skin the color of quiet defiance. The housekeeper smirked. "You won't last an hour." Mara only smiled. What no one knew was that she carried more than patience. She carried something the mansion had never seen: dignity. The mansion was perched on a hill, an island of wealth overlooking a world it pretended not to see. Its owner, Thomas Ashford, a tech billionaire with sharp suits and sharper morals, ran his empire with precision but ruled his home through neglect. His 4 children, Lucian, Violet, Theo, and Isla, had learned early that tantrums could fill the void where affection should have been. Nannies came and went like passing storms, each promising to bring order, each leaving in tears or silence. When Mara arrived, the staff whispered. She wasn't like the others. She was older, darker, and carried herself with the kind of calm that unsettled arrogance. Her resume wasn't impressive, no prestigious references, no degrees, but her eyes held history. She had raised siblings while working double shifts, cared for neighbors' children when no one else would, and survived a world that didn't expect her to. Thomas barely noticed her arrival. To him, maids were temporary fixtures, part of the furniture, but his children noticed. They saw her difference, the color of her skin, the quiet way she moved, the refusal to flinch when they tested her. On her first morning, a bowl of cereal was thrown across the room. She didn't yell. She picked up the pieces, wiped the milk, and said nothing. The housekeeper waited for the usual breakdown. It never came. Something was shifting, though no one yet understood what it meant. Mara was not there to survive the mansion. She was there to change it. Mara learned the rhythm of the house before the house learned her name. The Quadruplets, each born of the same wealth yet fractured by the same loneliness, tested her in different ways. Lucian, the eldest, treated her like air. Violet screamed to be seen. Theo destroyed things to feel alive. Isla, the quietest, hid behind walls of silence. They were children who had everything except tenderness. Other maids had responded with fear or frustration. Mara responded with something simpler: consistency. She woke them with songs instead of orders, replaced punishment with boundaries, and refused to be baited by cruelty. When Theo smeared paint across the walls, she didn't scold. She handed him a brush and said, "Finish it." When Violet hid her shoes out of spite, Mara walked barefoot, unbothered. Slowly, their chaos began to lose its power, but in the mansion's hierarchy, change was dangerous. The butler complained that Mara was too lenient. The housekeeper whispered that discipline was the only language these kids understand. Thomas ignored it all until a dinner party forced him to. Notice, the night was heavy with status. Executives and wives floated through candlelight, their laughter rehearsed. The children were expected to appear, perfect, polished props for a father's image. Instead, they sat quietly beside Mara, eating without tantrum. When a guest remarked how calm they were, Thomas glanced over, surprised. He didn't see the soft glances between the children and Mara, the invisible threads of trust she had sown. It was not without cost. One morning, a broken vase appeared in her room, shards placed like a warning. Another day, the driver muttered that people like her didn't belong here. The children overheard. That night, for the first time, they defended someone other than themselves. Lucian told the driver to leave. Violet cried and hugged Mara's leg. Change had taken root in the unlikeliest soil, but the mansion was not done testing her. When Thomas finally saw his children clinging to a woman he'd never respected, something in him stirred, something ugly and familiar. The kind that wears power like armor and prejudice like perfume. It happened on a rainy afternoon, when the sky pressed against the windows like gray glass. Thomas came home early and found his children in the garden, muddy, laughing, alive, while Mara stood nearby, letting them play in the storm. To him, it looked like chaos. To them, it was freedom. He shouted her name, his voice slicing the air. The children froze. For the first time, Mara looked afraid, not of him, but of what her silence might cost. He accused her of disrespect, of irresponsibility, of bringing her kind of disorder into his house. The words carried venom sharpened by years of unspoken bias. The staff watched, pretending not to hear. The rain fell harder. Mara could have begged or apologized. Instead, she stood her ground, soaked but steady, her voice low yet unshaking. She told him that his children weren't wild. They were wounded. That love wasn't weakness, and discipline without compassion was just cruelty in uniform. Her words weren't loud, but they were heard. Behind her, 4 small faces pressed against the glass. They watched their father shrink in the shadow of the truth. The man who built empires couldn't build a home. The man who demanded obedience from thousands had failed to earn the trust of 4. When the storm passed, Thomas walked away without a word. The next day, Mara's contract was under review, but something irreversible had already happened. The children refused to eat until she was reinstated. For the first time, the house that once silenced every protest echoed with tiny voices demanding justice. Weeks later, the mansion changed in quiet ways. The staff stopped whispering when Mara entered. The children learned to say, please, without prompting. Thomas began coming home earlier, not out of duty, but curiosity. He watched as his children grew gentler under her care, as laughter replaced the emptiness that money could never fill. One evening he approached her, not as a master, but as a man learning humility. He thanked her awkwardly, the word foreign on his tongue. Mara nodded, her smile small but certain. She wasn't there for gratitude. She was there for growth. By Christmas, the Quadruplets had written her a letter, each in shaky handwriting, "You stayed." It was only 2 words, but they held everything the mansion had been missing: belonging. The story of Mara spread quietly among the staff, then beyond the walls. To some, she was just a maid. To others, a miracle. But to the children, she was proof that love has no color and that strength doesn't shout. It endures. Racism didn't vanish from that house overnight. Prejudice rarely does. But for the first time, it was met with resistance, not from anger, but from grace. And in a world obsessed with power, one woman's patience became the loudest rebellion. In the end, Mara didn't just survive a day with the Billionaire's Quadruplets. She survived their world and changed it. Because sometimes the revolution doesn't come with fire or fists. It comes with kindness that refuses to be broken.